The most important part to any zoo is the animals in the enclosures they call home. Throughout the series, I'll be designing different enclosures for an array of animals, whilst also keeping guest interaction at the forefront of every build. Join me each week as I tackle a new enclosure and idea and try and bring it to life within Planet Zoo. Today I'm building my first multi-species enclosure, which will include giraffe and zebra. This is one of the biggest builds I've taken on so far in this series, and as you will see, there is a lot of aspects to this build that make it up and make one massive enclosure for two big species. The idea I had was simple: one big house for the animals and guests to access, and a walkway with a nice viewing bridge slash canopy so that guests were sheltered in all weather. The first stats we're going to look at today are for the giraffe. As you can see, the land requirement is very large, as expected. Water requirement isn't necessary, although I have added a lake. Here is the social structure on the screen now. Something a little different for this series, here is the animals that can be mixed together, and as you can see, the zebra is there on that list. Here is the stats for the zebra. Not as much land requirement, but obviously sharing an enclosure with the giraffe, it will need a lot of space because they needed to be added together. Here's the social structure for that, a much smaller group than the giraffe, and here again is proof that the zebras and giraffe can be put in the same enclosure. To start off this really big build, we are starting with the giraffe and zebra house, and as you can see, I'm just trying to get the shapes for those. The zebra house, I knew I wanted that to be a little bit smaller than the giraffe house. I also wanted to include a walkway for guests and a little keeper area again, because it makes it a bit more realistic. So I'm just getting the sizes here now. As you can see, I'm laying out with the walls. Next up was adding the roof. As you can see here, I'm just working on the different levels because obviously I want the giraffe house roof to be a bit higher than the zebra house. There's a bit of fiddling there, and a large part of this was adding the theming so that it wasn't just plain brown walls, and also sort of encouraging guests to come in and use the house. With a lot of the house enclosed, it was time to start adding some theming pieces, so I started outside at one end of the walkway and then worked my way in and started theming the corridor that guests would use. Here I am adding some more theming towards the back of the wall and the other side of the walkway. It was just trying to fill the space with sort of different colours and trying to sort of keep a flow and a pattern, so having things spaced out, and just sort of getting that pop of colour on that side of the wall just so that guests have something else to look at when walking down the corridor. With the corridor feeling themed, it was time to move outside, so I started at the same end that I started with, and started filling the space with this little hut and car, just so that there was something more to look at on your way up, as the outside of the enclosure wouldn't really stretch around this part of the build. So once that side was done, I then moved on to the other side and started looking at different theming pieces, seeing what would work, just so there's something different at either end of the build. Something that I knew would definitely help fill the space was foliage. So as you can see, I'm putting in some different plants and trees and long grass, just to really add that pop of colour and fill in the space. A little while on, I started adding rock work as well, just to the ground, just so there's different variants when walking up into the enclosure. With one end of the build looking lovely and green, I decided to do the same at the other end, by adding some palm trees and different plants, just so there's a wide variety of things for guests to look at and make it feel a bit more natural. I'm finally coming to the end of this part of the build. I'm just sort of adding different facades and pieces from this side of the house, just so there's something more to look at when guests are up on the high walkway. Speaking of the high walkway, it was time to crack on. I had a simple design, just using pillars and then covering it over with a hay style roof, and then adding some theming and extra supports just to really fill in the space and make it look a bit more of a structure. With the shelter not being the only bit of space up here, I also wanted to fill out this bit as well with some different style fencing and also adding some benches because it's quite a trek to get up there and just really divide up the space on either side of the walkway. One thing I did do off camera was the barriers. This was so I could crack straight on and get the animals into the enclosure once I'd finished building. Now that I've got the animals in the enclosure, it was time to get the habitat right for them. So originally I had sand, that wasn't correct in the end. I had a feeling they would want long grass, but it isn't very long on this style of map, but I went with it anyway. Obviously, I started filling in the space with trees, obviously to give it some height and things like that. But I didn't want to overcrowd the space with trees. I did consider some rocks, but I changed my mind. So I decided to start work on the watering hole. I didn't want anything too big, and I wasn't too fussed about the shape and what it looked like. It kind of ended up looking like a bit of a paw print in the end, which wasn't intentional. Next came adding the different enrichment items for both the zebra and giraffe, which I'm doing here with the different scratching posts and trees, and also not forgetting plenty of water stations as this is a very large enclosure. Lots of bedding is needed for this enclosure. With the two different species in there, they need plenty of areas to sleep. With there being lots of viewing areas around the edge of the enclosure, I wanted to add plenty of foliage so that the guests weren't just seeing plain dirt and grass, just to elevate the space. The last few finishing touches involved adding some rock works to the bottom of the walkway just to hide some of those pillars and give it some more support. And finally was just finishing off the roof on the house. Overall, I'm really happy with this build, even though it took a very long time and to get to this end result. But I'm happy with it, and I'm proud of myself for tackling a larger enclosure, and I know that I can do it again and maybe slightly better in the future.